Hello everybody, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy. We have been discussing some important topics for Polity mains examination, and today also we have a few more topics. Particularly these topics are related to the model code of conduct that we will be discussing, and apart from that we will also discuss the trend of criminalization of politics. So this is also we are going to discuss, and in fact this is also one of the very important topics, because you could expect questions on model code of conduct, you could expect questions on criminalization of politics, and apart from that we also have another topic, that is National Human Rights Commission. So National Human Rights Commission is another very important statutory body that has been established to protect human rights and also have a human rights regime in the country. So we will also be discussing about the National Human Rights Commission as well. Right. So firstly, understand what is model code of conduct. You might have seen questions on this, and you might have heard about this model code of conduct when you are reading newspapers. So what exactly is this model code of conduct? Now understand, India is a functional democracy, and in any functional democracy, free and fair elections is in fact foundation, right? So conducting elections in a free and fair manner would be considered as a foundational principle in any democracy. So Article 324 of the Indian Constitution provided for an independent constitutional body, that is Election Commission of India, and the Constitution has entrusted the Election Commission of India to conduct elections in a free and fair manner. Now, while Election Commission of India conduct elections in a fair manner, this model code of conduct would ensure that the elections are conducted in a free and fair manner, right? So MCC is a tool that ensures Election Commission of India conduct elections in a free and fair manner. So I hope you get a brief idea what exactly is this model code of conduct, right? So in fact this model code of conduct consists of a set of guidelines, right? So it has a set of guidelines, and those guidelines indicating the political parties and candidates who are contesting elections what should be done and what should not be done during elections. So that is what is known as a model code of conduct. It consists of a set of guidelines, so what should be done by the candidates and the political parties. And who issues model code of conduct? The Election Commission of India issues a model code of conduct when election schedule is announced. When election schedule is announced, Election Commission of India issues a model code of conduct, and it comes into force immediately after the election schedule is announced by the ECI. And in fact this model code of conduct regulates the behavior of the political parties, and it also regulates the behavior of candidates who are contesting elections. And this model code of conduct's primary objective is what? Its primary objective is conducting elections in a free and fair manner, and apart from that, preventing abuse of power by the governments in power, because the administrative machinery is with the government of the day. So therefore it is the responsibility of the Election Commission of India to prevent the abuse of the power by the governments of the day, and model code of conduct will help ensure preventing the abuse of power. So I hope you have understood what exactly is model code of conduct. Now here the problem with the model code of conduct is that it has been lacking a statutory backing, or I would say it has been lacking a legal backing. So there's no statutory status or legal status for the model code of conduct, and that is one big problem. right? So in fact, this model code of conduct is a consensus based guidelines. No doubt that this MCC have a set of guidelines, but those guidelines are consensus based guidelines. So consensus between whom? So consensus between the political parties. So there will be a consensus between the political parties and candidates who are contesting elections, and the Election Commission of India. So these are considered as relevant stakeholders. So they are stakeholders, and MCC is the result of a consensus between all these different stakeholders. So that's why it is said that it is a consensus based guidelines. And secondly, this model code of conduct is also called as a moral code of conduct. Moral code of conduct. Now, one thing that we should understand here is that MCC does not have a legal backing, right? So it is not legally enforceable, but model code of conduct would serve as a moral code that should be followed by political parties, that should be followed by the candidates, that should be followed by the people, to ensure that the election process would be done in a fair manner, in a free and fair manner, and also in a transparent and accountable manner. And candidates who are contesting elections and the political parties are expected to adhere to the model code of conduct. So this is what the model code of conduct actually says. And in fact, this model code of conduct is also aligned with the principles of the Indian Constitution. Now, what principles of the Indian Constitution uphold the model code of conduct? For example, Article 324 of the Indian Constitution, it entrusts the Election Commission of India with conducting free and fair elections in a free and fair manner. So therefore, MCC is also aligned with the constitutional principles, and MCC will help Election Commission of India conduct elections in a free and fair manner, and that is very, very important for any functional democracy. And apart from that, the Election Commission of India's enforcement authority, because once election schedule is announced by the Election Commission of India, so the model code of conduct will immediately comes into effect, right? And in fact, here Election Commission of India is having the constitutional obligations to conduct elections to the office of the president, to office of the vice president, to state legislative assemblies, state legislative councils, and the Lok Sabha and to the Rajya Sabha. So therefore, there is a constitutional obligation on the Election Commission of India to conduct elections. So therefore, Election Commission of India has the power to enforce the model code of conduct, and that will help ECI conduct elections to all these different offices or institutions, right? So this power has been granted to the Election Commission of India under Article 324 of the Indian Constitution, right? So when we talk about the model code of conduct in a broader sense, so it is a consensus based guidelines. Secondly, it is a moral code of conduct for all the political parties and also all the candidates, and it is also aligned with the constitution and constitutional principles. And at the same time, ECI has been given the power to implement the model code of conduct, right? So I hope you have understood what exactly is this model code of conduct. Now, what are the challenges in implementing the model code of conduct? And this aspect also we should understand, because it is not easy to implement model code of conduct in a country like India with largest population in the world and still higher levels of illiteracy existing in India. And in India, political parties are called as catch-all political parties, where there is no particular ideology for these political parties. And apart from that, you could also see the trend where there is a dynastic politics existing in India, and also criminalization of politics because of all these different reasons. So it is not easy for the Election Commission of India to implement model code of conduct. So it has to face certain challenges also. So we'll try to discuss what are the challenges. Now understand one thing, that we are living in a digital age. Now digital devices are accessible to almost everyone in India, right? So if you look at the internet penetration, so around 750 to 800 million people in India have access to internet. So therefore we can conclude that we are living in a digital age where information is easily available to everyone. However, this model code of conduct fails to address challenges which are being posed by the digital platforms, right? So in fact, the digital platforms have been posing new challenges almost like every day, right? So because of that particular reason, it is not easy to implement the model code of conduct. For example, a misinformation is being spread, right? So misinformation is being spread on internet, on social media platforms and other digital platforms. Apart from that, limited enforcement power of the Election Commission of India, right? So it is also having a limited enforcement power. So limited enforcement power in the sense that, so we have discussed that it has no legal backing, right? So it has no legal backing, and that is the problem here, right? So since it has no legal backing or no legally enforceability, so it has been enabling the political parties and the candidates to violate it without facing significant consequences, right? So therefore still there are violations of this model code of conduct, and the major reason for that is a lack of legal backing. And similarly, there is a lack of a clarity over this, right? So there's a lack of clarity over the implementation of the model code of conduct, right? So when we talk about lack of clarity on the implementation of the model code of conduct, so the use of government resources leading to confusion and also inconsistent enforcement, right? So the enforcement is inconsistent because yes, it has a set of guidelines, but still it lacks the legal backing, so that makes it a little bit vague, and that's why it is being called as it lacks a clarity. There's a no proper clarity, no clear guidelines about the model code of conduct and its implementation. And apart from that, model code of conduct is also having a limited scope. So that essentially means that it covers the conduct of political parties, candidates during elections, overlooking crucial areas like campaign finance, regulation, so all those different aspects. Now here the campaign finance regulation is a very important aspect that needs regulation, because political parties and candidates, when they are contesting elections, so they are spending a huge amount of money, and it will invariably leads to increase in money power and also increase in muscle power. And one reason for increasing criminalization of politics is increasing use of money power and muscle power in politics. When model code of conduct is being enforced, so it should adequately deal with preventing the use of money power and muscle power. For that, it should have a proper regulations when it comes to the campaign financing. So there should be proper limitations on the campaign financing. And apart from that, there should be a time bound effectiveness as well. So when we discuss about time bound effectiveness, so model code of conduct is a time bound, right? So it should be implemented in a one particular period of time. So when I say a time bound, this model code of conduct would comes into effect immediately the election schedule is announced, and it will be enforced till the declaration of the results. So therefore, when it is in a when MCC is implemented in a time bound manner, it would lose its effectiveness once the elections are concluded, allowing for pre and post election violations without any repercussions. For example, when I say lack of clarity with respect to implementation of model code of conduct, so what does it mean? So lack of clarity essentially means that, for example, if someone violates the model code of conduct, any candidate, any political party violates the model code of conduct, so there is no legally prescribed punishment. So what should that mean? For example, a candidate violates model code of conduct, so he should be disqualified from contesting elections for a time period, for example 2 years, for 3 years, or for 5 years. And if a political party violates the model code of conduct, the Election Commission of India should have the power to deregister the political parties or disqualify the political parties from contesting elections. So there should be more clarity, there should be a legal backing, so that it will result in conducting elections in a free and fair and more transparent manner, and it will also substantially reduce the use of money power and muzzle power in the elections. Now if you look at elections, even though EVMs are being introduced, still there are news reports about booth capturing and other electoral malpractices which are done by the various political parties and also candidates. Now in this context, implementation of model code of conduct is very, very important. So it should be implemented in a very stringent manner, and that's how elections will be conducted in a free and fair manner. But still there are a lot of loopholes that are existing when it comes to conducting elections by the Election Commission of India and implementation of the model code of conduct. Now what are those loopholes which are existing? So if you look at those loopholes, for example, so this model code of conduct does not prohibit the use of religion or caste in election campaigns, so that can lead to the communal and divisive politics, right? So whenever in fact in Indian politics, the problem is that religion and caste is excessively used. Religion and caste are excessively used. So we can also say that casteization of Indian politics, politicization of caste in India, and communal politics is also another major trend that we see in Indian politics. So therefore, in this context, whenever we have a model code of conduct, and that should adequately deal with both caste and religion as well. And in fact, the model code of conduct should also deal with the hate speeches targeting a particular community. And that is also very, very important to make sure that the election process is done in a more and more inclusive manner, and elections would be conducted in a free and fair manner. Now in this context, what should be the way forward? Way forward for the model code of conduct, or better implementation of model code of conduct. So what are the reforms that we could bring in the model code of conduct? So one thing is strengthening penalties, punishments is a very important aspect that we should focus on, right? So when we strengthen the penalties, so of course there is a probability, there is a more probability that this could act as a deterrent on the political parties and on the candidates, right? So if they violate any of the guidelines which are issued as part of the model code of conduct, so there will be a penalty and there will be a punishment, and this deterrence effect will ensure a better implementation of the model code of conduct. For example, in 2019 Lok Sabha elections, what happened was Election Commission of India disqualified a candidate for 3 years, right, because he violated the model code of conduct by seeking votes in the name of religion. So we have just discussed that religion should not be used in elections, during election campaign. So no religion, no caste politics, and apart from that there should be no use of hate speech against any particular community, right? So in case of any those acts done by the political party or the candidates, so there may be punishment, there may be a penalty that we have seen in this case. And improved monitoring is also very important. So when I say improved monitoring, the Election Commission of India again in 2019, so it has used mobile apps to monitor election campaigns and also detect violations of the code as well, and it also addresses the existing loopholes. So in 2019 Lok Sabha elections, the Election Commission of India issued guidelines to political parties to refrain from using the armed forces for political propaganda. So there is a trend that even armed forces are also being used during the political campaigns. So it should not be used. But immediately Election Commission of India issued a set of guidelines to all the political parties that they should not use the armed forces for mobilizing the voters. So that is also a very important aspect, and awareness campaigns must be taken up on a large scale. So for that, information, communication and education campaigns must be organized. And there is a C-Vigil app, right? There is a C-Vigil app, and Election Commission of India has also launched sweep program, right? So therefore such campaigns must be taken up. So those campaigns would enhance awareness among the people about the model code of conduct, implementation of model code of conduct, and conducting elections in a free and fair manner without money power, muzzle power, and without any electoral malpractices. So such large scale voter awareness campaigns must be taken up. And similarly, collaboration with the civil society organizations, is also another very important dimension when it comes to conducting elections, right? So because civil society also plays a very important role, because civil society can actually monitor elections. It plays a very important role in monitoring elections, and it also plays a very important role in successful implementation of this sweep program and C-Vigil app. In case of electoral malpractices, violations of MCC can be immediately reported to the Election Commission of India. So therefore, keeping this in mind, CSO, the civil society organization, or ECI collaborating with the civil society organization is very important aspect as well. So next is a criminalization of politics, and criminalization of politics is also another disturbing trend that we have been observing in Indian politics, right? So in fact, if you look at the parliamentarians and even the members of State Legislative Assembly and State Legislative Council, so most of the members are having criminal cases against them. So they are having criminal cases against them, and this is not good for any functional democracy, that the criminals have been entering into politics and they are making rules, they are making policies and laws for the public, and this is not in the long-term interest of any democracy. So first of all, this is a very important topic, and you may get a question on this criminalization of politics as well. Now first, understand some data with respect to criminalization of politics in India. So according to the National Crime Records Bureau, NCRB, so National Crime Records Bureau has released a report on criminalization of politics, and the name of report is Crime in India. So Crime in India, so it was a bit old report, so it would be better if you quote any new report with respect to the trend of criminalization of politics in India. So according to National Crime Records Bureau's report on criminalization politics, so 9,427 cases of crimes are committed by the politicians. So these many number of cases have been registered against the politicians in India, and of which 4,029 cases are related to the political corruption, or I would say these many number of cases are related to corruption in Indian politics. And even according to the recent data, 46% of the members of parliament have a criminal records. So they have criminal records, and understand one thing, 46% is not a small number, right? So a many number of MPs have heinous crimes registered against them. So therefore we have been observing this trend of criminalization of politics, and that is not good for any democracy, particularly for India. And first of all, we will try to understand the definition of criminalization of politics. So what exactly is the definition of criminalization of politics? So criminalization of politics actually refers to the infiltration of individuals. So individuals would be entered into the politics, but those individuals would have criminal background. So those individuals who have criminal background and they enter into the politics, or they enter into the political arena, and this is what is known as criminalization of politics. Criminalization of politics. So this is what is called as criminalization of politics, and according to some data, 46% of the MPs have criminal records against them, or criminal cases registered against them. And in fact, those people who have criminal cases against them, so they participate in elections, they contest in elections, and subsequently they win elections, and they became parliamentarians, and they also became members of the state legislative assemblies. And this is what is called as the criminalization of politics, right? So I hope you have understood what exactly is criminalization of politics. But the root cause of the problem of criminalization of politics is due to unhealthy association between the politicians and criminals. So there is a nexus. So it is also known as the unholy nexus that has been existing between the politicians and also the bureaucrats, and even criminals. So this is what is the root cause of the problem, and this is considered as a matter of great and grave concern, and that has been highlighted by the Supreme Court already in several number of cases, and we will discuss those many number of cases in the coming lectures. So what is the reason for the criminalization of politics in India? So there are set of reasons, and those are the main reasons for the criminalization of politics in India. First reason is the political reason. So what political reason that we could actually give? The first political reason we have already discussed, that there is an unholy nexus. So unholy nexus that has been existing between whom? Between politicians, or between the political parties, between the bureaucrats, between the political parties, bureaucrats, and also the criminals. So this unholy nexus is the root cause of the present problem of criminalization of politics. So why we have a 46% of the MPs have a criminal cases against them? And because of the unholy nexus that has been existing between these many number of stakeholders. And this unholy nexus has been leading to what? It has been leading to the infiltration of criminals into the politics, and they become lawmakers. So in fact they are being called as lawbreakers, but here the lawbreakers would become the lawmakers, and they are also making laws for the general public. Usually they are lawbreakers because they have committed a crime and criminal cases are pending against them, but now they are in assemblies and they are in parliament and they are making laws, right? So therefore the corrupt individuals are entering into the political system, and they are making laws, they are making policies for the general public. Now in this case they are not sensitive to the interests of public. So they are not sensitive to the larger aspirations, interests and wishes of the people. They are insensitive, and they very often look for their personal interest over the larger public interest, right? So this further leads to the trends like corruption in Indian politics and malpractices in conducting elections, frequent violations of the model code of conduct, right? So MCC would also be very frequently violated, and more corrupt elements would enter into the Indian politics, right? So I would say this trend is very close to legitimizing criminal elements entering into politics, and also increasing the chances of winning elections. So I hope you have understood how the unholy nexus is the main cause of entering criminalization of politics. So next is corruption. So corruption is also the other major reason for criminalization of politics. So in every election, political parties put up candidates with a criminal background. Now why political parties have been favoring candidates who are having criminal cases against them? So one reason is that there is a high probability of candidates who are having criminal cases against them winning elections. So there is a high probability that they win elections, right? So why they win elections? Because those people who have criminal cases against them, they could use the money power route and also muscle power when it comes to conducting elections, right? So people also fear those people who are having criminal cases against them, and therefore there is a high chances of winning election for the people who are having criminal cases against them. And since every political party wanted that they should get more number of seats in the respective house, whether it is Lok Sabha or state legislative assemblies. So since the criminals are having more chances of winning elections, the political parties are very often favoring giving tickets to the people who are having criminal cases against them. So this is another major reason for the criminalization of politics. However, there are certain legal loopholes which are existing. So what legal loopholes are existing? For example, the Representation of People's Act, so that was passed in the 1951. So it is also known as RPA Act 1951. So this RPA Act 1951 actually disqualifies any candidate for being an MP or an MLA after the conviction. Only after conviction a person would be disqualified for being an MP or an MLA, not before any criminal case is pending in any court against any MP or MLA, right? So even if that particular criminal case or that particular individual is under trial also, then also he will not be disqualified under the Representation of People Act, but only if he is convicted by any court for more than 2 years, only then that particular MP or MLA would be disqualified, right? So this is one legal loophole that has been existing, that has been making, or that has been incentivizing the criminal elements enter into the politics. And in fact, when it comes to voters casting their vote, they are just looking at the narrow interests. So what are the interests which could be considered as a narrow interests? For example, voters preferring their caste, voters preferring the religion, and voters are very often taking bribe or taking money for vote, right? So even liquor for vote, and even ethnicity would be another factor for casting their vote. So they're not looking at the criminal history of the candidate, but they're looking at the factors like caste, they're looking at the factors like religion, and they are also looking at the factors like ethnicity and their political affiliations. So these are the factors which have been primarily influencing the decisions of the voters, but not the criminal history, which is a very, very serious concern. So because of that reason, there is a need for information, education and communication campaigns that have to be organized in a large scale, and that will help address the problem of the criminalization of politics. So I hope it is clear for you. Now, vote buying is also another major problem. Now, whenever election schedule is announced and all the political parties have been started campaigning for their respective political parties and their candidates, there is an excessive use of money during the elections. So why money is being excessively used by the political parties? So it is being held that they buy votes, and they distribute money to the public. They distribute things like liquor and others to the people, right? So therefore they have been excessively using money to mobilize voters, to influence voters. I would better use the word to manipulate the voters, right? So this is not part of conducting elections in a free and fair manner. So elections must be conducted in a free and fair manner, right? So it actually undermines entire election process, entire democracy as well. So it undermines democracy because voters are not casting vote keeping in mind their own keeping in mind the national interest, the interest of the community, and the larger public interest. So these are not the factors which have been influencing the voters, but rather other factors: caste, religion, ethnicity, money power, muscle power. And these are the factors which have been influencing the voters, and because of that reason, there is a high probability of the entire democracy would be undermined by this. And similarly, the election commission. So there are certain issues with the election commission of India also. So because of this reason also, there is a trend of increasing criminals have been increasingly entering into the politics. For example, we can say that a trust deficit has been existing. So what does it mean when we say trust deficit? For example, there is a delayed action against ruling party candidates. And even, for example, the chief election commissioner and other election commissioners are appointed by whom? So they are appointed by the president. So president is part of the executive. Here, the Council of Ministers have a huge role to play when it comes to the appointment of the chief election commissioners and other election commissioners. And because of that particular reason, the Election Commission of India is very often criticized that there is a delayed response or delayed action taken by the Election Commission of India against candidates who are from the ruling political party. And even some candidates from the ruling party violate the model code of conduct. So the Election Commission of India is not very proactive to take a strict action against candidates who belong to the ruling political party who violate the model code of conduct. So all these factors have resulted in erosion of public trust. So it has been resulted in erosion of public trust on the Election Commission of India, because Election Commission of India is expected to be neutral, it is expected to be impartial, non-biased, but delayed action on candidates from the ruling parties. And in fact, even if candidates openly violate the model code of conduct, then also Election Commission of India is silent. So that has been resulted in erosion of public trust on the Election Commission of India and the way it has been functioning. And similarly, there is a lack of adequate infrastructure, and that is another major problem that the Election Commission of India has been facing when it comes to implementation of MCC or combating criminalization of politics, combating trends like criminalization of politics, because they are having insufficient resources, and because of that particular reason, so it actually hinder the ability to effectively monitor and ensure compliance with the electoral regulations. So therefore, there should be more financial or budgetary allocations should be done for the Election Commission of India. They should have their own secretariat, right? And they should also have their own staff for conducting elections. They should not depend on the government when it comes to conducting elections, and they should also have access to infrastructure, and that will help them enable conducting elections in a free and fair manner. And similarly, so those people who are having criminal cases against them, so in fact, delayed justice, delayed pronouncement of the cases, increased dependency of the cases is also another major problem that we have been facing. So there's an increased dependency of the cases and a delayed justice, right? So for example, a criminal case is pending against any MP or an MLA. It takes several years to ultimately pronounce the judgment by the courts. And there is also a very low conviction rate for those people who are accused of criminal cases pending against them, right? So this has been creating a perception of impunity, and it has also encouraging entry of individuals with a criminal backgrounds into politics. And that's why we have been seeing a trend of around 46% of the MPs are having criminal cases pending against them. So in this context, what should be the consequences of criminalization of politics, right? So there might be consequences, and that's why we have been discussing that criminalization of politics is a trend is not good. So there is a need to arrest the trend of criminalization of politics. Now, what are the consequences? Why there are concerns about this? Now, because of criminalization of politics, Parliament's credibility would be undermined. So why Parliament's credibility would be undermined? Because in the Parliament, most of the MPs would have the criminal cases pending against them. Now here, what does this mean? So it means that lawbreakers become lawmakers. So criminals become lawmakers, and they make laws, they pass laws for the people. They are insensitive for the public, or they are less sensitive for the public, and they look for their narrow personal interest instead of larger public interest, right? So because of all these different reasons, there is a probability that when more and more criminals are becoming MPs and they are become MLAs, so it could actually weaken the legislative quality, and over a period of time it also erode the public trust on the institution, and along with eroding the public trust on the institution, so it would also undermine the entire democracy, undermine democratic process, and it would also in the long term may create a large scale public unrest as well. Large scale public unrest, because parliament is considered as a temple of democracy. Important laws and legislative decisions are taken in the parliament, but nowadays parliament is increasingly filled with the criminals, and criminals have their own personal interests. They are insensitive to the public needs, and because of all these reasons, so public would may get disaffected about the political process, and it would undermine the democracy, and it may lead to large scale public unrest as well. And when the political parties are also favoring giving tickets to the politicians, right? Because the criminals are having more chances of winning elections, and because of that reason, the political parties are also interested in giving tickets to the people who are having criminal cases. So therefore, more and more criminals are contesting elections. They are entering into the parliament and state legislative assembly, and this makes people have limited choice. And similarly, none of the above option on the EVM. So it has not been given significant weightage also. So because of all these reasons, we could say that people have a limited choice, because more number of people who are having criminal cases pending against them, so they are contesting elections, and this would ultimately dilute the principle of conducting elections in a free and fair manner. And similarly, corruption is considered as a breeding ground. For example, the influx of money power, the influx of muscle power, and higher expenditures than what Election Commission of India permits, or what the Representation of People's Act 1951 permits. So this very often leads to the corruption, and this also leads to the unholy nexus between different elements. For example, between the politicians and the criminals, between the politicians, bureaucrats, and the criminals. This ultimately result in tainted democracy, and election process would completely be dominated by the increased use of money and muscle power, and that trend must be arrested. That trend must not be supported. And it would also leads to disrupting social harmony. So how it would disrupt the social harmony? So as I have already explained, that when criminals are entering into the politics, so they may go for large scale violence if they are in the government, because they are criminals and they are insensitive to the public needs. So public face many challenges. For example, poverty is a challenge, illiteracy is a challenge, unemployment is a challenge, and national security is also a problem. Internal security is also another issue, and health, education, sanitation. So all these are different issues, but criminals very often insensitive to all these needs. They just look after their own personal needs. So this is another major problem, right? So it actually result in a negative perception among the public about the politicians, and criminal politicians also set a negative role models, promoting a culture of violence. And in fact, the judicial faith is in question, because there are cases where Supreme Court has suggested that there is a need to set up fast track courts to try cases pending against these criminal politicians. But still there is a huge judicial pendency, and cases have been pending for several years, and there is a huge delay in pronouncing judgments on important cases. So all these factors have been giving a certain leeway for the criminal politicians. So it ultimately lead to the undermining judicial faith of public over the judiciary. However, time to time, the Supreme Court has dealt with the issue of criminalization of politics through different judgments. So what are the judgments through which the Supreme Court has actually dealt with the issue? For example, in 1997, the Supreme Court has held that not to suspend a conviction of a person on appeal if convicted and sentenced to imprisonment under the Prevention of Corruption Act of 1988. So this is what the Supreme Court has held. Okay, so and Association of Democratic Reforms versus Union of India case 2002. So a contesting candidate should disclose the pending criminal convictions, pending criminal cases against him. So this is what the Supreme Court has said. For example, any candidate who is going to contest elections, so before contesting elections, when he files the nomination paper, he must disclose the criminal cases pending against him. And a Lily Thomas case is also another significant landmark judgment of the Supreme Court. So it says that automatic disqualification of an MP or an MLA upon conviction of more than 2 years for any criminal case. And similarly, People's Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India 2014 case. So the Supreme Court has recognized the right to negative vote. For example, if any individual who is casting his vote and he don't like any candidate who is listed, so then he can give his vote to the none of the above option that is listed on the EVM. So thereby nota will actually put a moral pressure on the political parties. And similarly, the Public Interest Foundation versus Union of India case 2014. So complete pending trials of MP and MLA cases within the 1 year. And the Lok Prahari versus Union of India case 2018. So in this case, the Supreme Court has asked all the political parties and candidates who have been contesting elections to mandatorily disclose the source of income the political candidates as well as their dependents and associates are receiving. So this is to ensure there would be more transparency and more accountability, and this is also to ensure that the criminal elements would not enter the parliament, would not enter into the state legislative assemblies. So the lawbreakers would not become the lawmakers. So the Public Interest Foundation case 2018. So in this case, so the Supreme Court has directed the political parties and the candidates to disclose the pending criminal cases against the candidates through the Election Commission, and also political parties to publicize the same through different media, the print media, electronic media, and the social media. And Public Interest Foundation and others versus Union of India and ANR case 2020. So in this case, the Supreme Court has held that mandatory for the political parties to publish the details of pending criminal cases against the candidates and also reasons to select them over the others. So all these things would ensure that the political parties would be more careful when it comes to selecting candidates, and when the political parties and candidates disclose their details and put them in the public domain, so the public would take into consideration their criminal cases and they would take appropriate decision when it comes to casting their vote. However, the Law Commission has actually made a certain recommendations, and those recommendations would specifically deals with the issue of criminalization of politics. So firstly, amendments to the sections of the Representation of People Act 1951 has been suggested by the Law Commission, right? So in fact, section 125A of the Representation of People Act 1951 says that conviction for more than 2 years should be a ground for disqualification under section 8 clause 1 of the Representation of People Act. So this could be a disqualification ground. And similarly, section 125A of the Representation of People Act, so minimum 2 years of sentence or sentence would be given for filing a false affidavit by the candidates. And even if any candidate do the corrupt practices under section 123, so then also the candidate would be disqualified. So include filing false affidavits as a corrupt practice. So then bar on contesting elections. So barring individuals charged with the offenses which are punishable by more than 5 years from contesting elections. And timely trials and disqualification, right? So there should be fast track courts, there should be special courts which actually takes into consideration the criminal cases which are pending against the sitting MPs and MLAs. So complete trials within a time bound manner. So a proper time frame, so within that particular proper time frame, the trials must be completed within 1 year or less than 1 year, and automatic disqualification after 1 year if they prove guilty. And similarly, there should be state funding. So state funding of election has been suggested by several committees, for example Indrajit Gupta committee and also Dinesh Goswami committee. So state funding of elections would reduce excess expenditure by the politicians, candidates and even the political parties, and that would some extent reduce the excessive use of money power and the muscle power, and the political parties would also select candidates wisely, and it would also substantially increase the representation of women and representation from the lower sections of the society, or marginalized sections or deprived sections of the society as well. And there should be a right to recall, and this is one of the mechanism of direct democracy, and this right to recall should also be introduced to ensure that the public representatives are more accountable to the public, right? So granting voters the power to recall non-performing elected representatives. And similarly, there is a need to further strengthen the Election Commission of India. So the Election Commission of India must be empowered to deregister the political parties, and that is also very, very important. So this power must be given to the ECI. So as of now, ECI is having power to only register the political parties, but it is not having the powers to deregister the political parties. So it should be given this power to deregister the political parties to deal stringently with the criminalization of politics, and ECI should be given some powers to deal with the criminalization of politics as well, right? For example, matters of investigation, exercise of prosecution power under the Representation of People Act, and also appointment of special courts for RPA offences as well. So all these powers must be given for the Election Commission of India to arrest the trend of the criminalization of politics and also conduct elections in a free and fair manner. So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our class, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.